Your brain has a reset button. Nobody told you how to use it. I was sitting in my car in a parking garage a few months ago, about to walk into a meeting I'd been dreading for 2 weeks. Hand on the door handle. I just could not make myself open it. Not because I was unprepared, I knew the material cold. Not because anything was actually going to go wrong. I knew that too, rationally, in that useless way where you know the thing and it doesn't help at all. But my chest was tight, my thoughts were running fast and going nowhere useful, and the harder I tried to just calm down and get it together, the more aware I became of the fact that I couldn't calm down and get it together, which made everything worse. So I sat there, hand on the door, completely unable to move. And I remember thinking, I have tried so many things for this. Read so many books about this. Built routines and practiced breathing and journaled at 6 a.m. and done the whole thing. And right now, when I actually need something to work, I have nothing. That's the problem I want to talk about today. Not the long game of mental health and self-improvement. Specifically, the 60-second window. The moment when the state is already running and everything you've read and everything you've practiced is inaccessible because you need to be in a relatively decent state to access any of it. And when you're in the middle of panic or overthinking or sudden sadness or the kind of anger that shows up before you've decided to be angry, you are not in a relatively decent state. You're inside the thing, and the thing has taken most of your useful equipment offline. What I found, and this is what the whole piece is about, is that your brain comes preloaded with 8 specific physical mechanisms that can interrupt any of those states in under 30 seconds. Not after a practice. Not over time. Right now, in the window when you need it. I've used all of them. I've gone into the actual neuroscience behind why each one works. And I'm going to walk you through all 8, plus the pattern underneath all of them that I think is the most useful thing here. I'll hold that for the end. Stay with me. Quick bit of context on why I trust any of this, because I spent years believing tools that turned out to be completely useless in the actual moment, and I want you to know I'm not coming at this from a place of having it sorted. There was probably 2 years, maybe a bit more, where I was consistently off in that low-grade daily kind of way that doesn't get dramatic enough to name but quietly messes with everything. Not a breakdown, nothing you could point to, just the anxiety that was slightly too intense for what triggered it. The anger that was slightly too hot. The flat gray nothing is wrong state that sat on me for days with no explanation and no handle. Lying awake when I needed sleep, groggy when I finally could rest. Going through the days feeling like I was 2 steps behind myself, watching it happen from somewhere slightly behind my own eyes. Giving responses that felt slightly delayed or slightly wrong for the situation, and then being confused about where that came from. Dropping into states and white-knuckling through until they lifted. Getting more irritated than things warranted and spending energy afterward trying to figure out why. The frustrating part, and I think a lot of people will recognize this, is that nothing was wrong. I couldn't explain to anyone what was happening because there was no event, no crisis, no specific thing I could point to and say, that's what this is about, which made it hard to take seriously, which meant I mostly just kept going, waiting for it to resolve on its own, which it would for a while, and then it wouldn't. And I was doing the things. I want to be specific about this because I don't want this to sound like I just hadn't tried. I had tried. I meditated long enough to get past the part where it's just uncomfortable and boring and into the part where it's supposed to work. I read the books, Atomic Habits, Thinking Fast and Slow, the nervous system regulation stuff, the stoicism, the attachment theory, the trauma stuff, all of it. I built morning routines and kept them for months. I journaled. I worked out consistently. I tried therapy at a couple different points. And some of it helped quietly in the background in ways that were real but hard to measure. But every time I was actually inside one of the states, mid-spiral, mid-panic, mid that gray flat thing, none of it was accessible. Meditation requires enough stillness to enter it, which is exactly what you don't have when you're in a panic. Journaling works for processing what already happened, not for stopping what's actively happening to you right now. The breathing exercises I'd learned were designed for calm conditions, which are not the conditions you're in when you need them. And willpower, just deciding to feel differently, has never worked on a nervous system that didn't get the memo. The thing I eventually figured out is that there are 2 completely different kinds of mental health tool, and almost nobody draws the line between them clearly. Maintenance tools, practices you build over time that shift your baseline, that make you more resilient in the long run, that work in the background. and interrupt tools, things you use inside the window in the 60 seconds when the state is running, that stop it before it does its damage. The whole industry is almost entirely focused on the first kind. Books, apps, therapists, morning routines, journaling prompts, all maintenance. The second kind is what I spent 2 years looking for and couldn't find in the places people usually look. So eventually I stopped looking in those places and went into the actual research. I found 8 things. Here they are. Before the techniques, I need to give you 2 minutes on what's actually happening in your brain during these states, because if I just list the tips without the mechanism, you're going to use them once, feel vaguely skeptical, and never reach for them when you actually need them. The mechanism is what creates trust. 2 minutes. You're running 2 completely different operating systems in your brain simultaneously, and they have completely different priorities. The first one is old, the emotional reactive system that runs on threat detection and pattern recognition, that fires before you've consciously registered what's happening. Call it the alarm. When it spots something that resembles danger, real, emotional, social, a memory of something that went badly once, it goes, before you've decided anything. Heart rate up, cortisol in, breathing changes, muscles tighten, vision narrows. You know this feeling from the inside. You've felt all of it. The second system is your prefrontal cortex, the rational, deliberate part. Call it the CEO. The part that can step back and say, wait, is this actually an emergency? The part where clear thinking lives. When the alarm fires, blood flow shifts away from the CEO. Your brain deprioritizes rational processing to give more resources to the fast reactive system. Which means the moments you most need clear thinking are exactly when your brain has made it hardest to access. That's why you can know something is irrational and still not be able to use that knowledge. That's not weakness or lack of willpower or something being wrong with you. That's the wiring. But the alarm has back doors. Specific physical inputs, things you do with your body, that reach it before the thinking brain gets involved. Signals it can't ignore. When you send those signals deliberately, you change what the alarm is doing from the bottom up without needing a clear head to do it. That's what these 8 techniques are. Hardware-level inputs. Let's go through them. The first one is for overthinking. I want to describe it specifically because it's different from general anxiety, and treating them the same way is how you end up with the wrong tool. Anxiety is forward-facing, it's about what might go wrong. Overthinking is circular. It's the same thought coming back in slightly different versions without ever going anywhere. You replay the conversation, what you said, what they said, what you should have said, what they probably meant, what you should do about it, whether doing anything would make it better or worse, and then you're back at the start of the conversation. Full circuit. Nothing gained except material to run it again. The harder you try to stop it, the more you think about the fact that you're trying to stop it, which is its own new thought to process. The loop tightens. And the specific awful feature of overthinking is that it always feels like it's about to go somewhere useful. Like you're one more pass away from clarity. You're not. There is no clarity inside the loop. The loop doesn't produce clarity, it produces more loop. It's worst in silence. In bed, in the shower, in traffic. Anywhere your external environment isn't demanding enough of your attention. Your brain at those moments has spare capacity and reaches for the loop because the loop is right there and feels urgent. This is why you can get through a whole hard day feeling reasonably okay and then get into bed and immediately have 12 problems that apparently need solving at 1 a.m. The day was keeping you out. The silence let you back in. Grab something cold. Ice from the freezer, a cold glass of water, your wrists under a cold tap. Hold it. Same time, look around wherever you are and name 5 things you can see. Out loud if you can. Specific. Not just a lamp, but that lamp, the silver one with the slightly bent shade, the one on the left side of the desk. 5 actual specific things in your actual current environment. The cold sends a fast physical signal the alarm reads as incoming external information, which briefly pulls its attention away from the internal loop to the outside world. Creates a gap. The naming exercise locks the gap in place because naming concrete visible objects requires language, and language is a CEO function. You're forcing the rational brain back online by making it do a simple job. The whole thing takes 15 seconds. It doesn't resolve whatever you were thinking about. It breaks the circuit. You can look at the actual problem from outside the spin. You cannot do useful thinking from inside it. And I want to be honest that this feels stupid when you first do it. Grabbing something cold and naming lamps while your chest is tight feels like a category error. Like the problem is real and you're responding with a party trick. But the party trick works because the problem, however real it is being processed through a state that makes everything worse, and you can change the state. I used this in that parking garage. Hand on the door handle, couldn't move. I grabbed the cold metal of the door itself, looked around and named 5 things out loud into my empty car. A yellow pillar, a white sedan, an exit sign, a crack in the concrete that looked like a river from above, the red light on a camera in the corner. Then I walked in. The meeting was fine. It's almost always fine. The thing the loop told me was a catastrophe was a Wednesday afternoon meeting with 3 people who were not thinking about me nearly as hard as I was thinking about being thought about. The loop always feels urgent. That's its defining feature, the thing that makes it so hard to dismiss. Before I understood that the urgency was a product of the state and not a signal about the content, I used to take it seriously. Like, the fact that my brain was treating something as important at 2 a.m. meant it must be important. That's actually deranged when you say it out loud. But from inside the loop, it has its own logic. The loop presents itself as productive thinking. It feels like you're working through something. You're not. You're circling something. There is a difference, and the loop is very good at hiding it. Using this technique enough times shows you something you can't be told. The same thoughts look completely different from outside the loop than from inside it. From inside, they're emergencies. From outside, 20 minutes later, they're regular, manageable, sometimes genuinely trivial. The content didn't change. The state changed. And the state was manufacturing the urgency as a byproduct of being the state, not because the content was actually urgent. Once you've experienced that gap enough times, urgent from inside, unremarkable from outside, you start to hold the loop's claims with a lot less credulity. You still address the actual things. You just stop doing it from inside the spin at 1 a.m. in bed, which is never when you'll think about anything well. The thoughts deserve better than that. The decisions deserve better than that. You deserve better than that. You can use this proactively too. If you're heading into something where overthinking is likely, a hard conversation, a meeting with stakes, a social situation that tends to make you anxious, run the 5 things exercise before you go in. 20 seconds. It's a prefrontal cortex warm-up. Gets the rational brain more online before the alarm has a reason to fire. The difference in how present you are walking into something when you've done this versus when you haven't is noticeable in a way that surprised me the first few times. This next one sounds the most ridiculous, so I'm doing the full setup before I tell you what it is. If I lead with the technique, you'll dismiss it and I'll have wasted both our time. The sadness I'm describing isn't grief. It's not the kind attached to a nameable cause. It's the weight that just shows up. You were fine and then you weren't. Nothing to argue with because there's no premise. Nothing to solve because there's no problem. Just the feeling sitting on you with no handle and no explanation on what would otherwise be a completely normal Tuesday. Your brain reads signals from your body to decide and maintain what you're feeling, not just send signals to it. Both directions. Your posture, your facial expression, where your eyes are pointed, how tight your muscles are. All incoming data your brain uses continuously to calibrate your emotional state. When you're sad, your body goes into the sad configuration automatically. Spine slightly curved forward, chest contracted, gaze down, face neutral or downturned. Your brain receives those signals and confirms. Yep, sad. Continuing. The loop runs both ways. It will keep running the sad direction as long as your body keeps providing the sad inputs. Sit up straight, chin slightly up. Hold a smile for 20 seconds. Fake one is fine. I know exactly how that sounds. Keep reading. The facial feedback effect, that voluntarily changing your facial expression produces a corresponding shift in your actual emotional state, is supported well enough in the research to be worth using. The effect is moderate, not magic. It's not going to fix a depressive episode or touch anything with a genuine clinical dimension. But for the sourceless ambient sadness that drops on you on a regular Tuesday with no explanation, it disrupts the loop maintaining it. You're sending your brain conflicting physical data. Posture says up and forward, face says something approaching positive, and your brain doesn't know how to receive those inputs and simultaneously conclude, deep sadness, maintaining. Something gives. 20 seconds. You'll feel like an idiot for most of them. That's fine. Feeling like an idiot and slightly less hollow is better than feeling composed and completely hollow. Take the trade. Before I understood this feedback loop, I thought of my moods as things that happened to me from the outside. Whether I was inside. The sadness arrived, it did what it did, it eventually left. I had no relationship with the physical dimension of it at all. And then I started actually paying attention to what my body was doing at different points during different emotional states. Where it was, how it was positioned, what it was doing with itself. What I noticed was uncomfortable to sit with. I realized that for hours at a time, I was sitting in configurations that were feeding my brain data that said low energy, slightly down, withdrawn. And my brain was using it. Not maliciously, just using the data it was given. The states I thought were just arriving were being actively maintained by physical inputs I was providing unconsciously, continuously, for hours at a time. That's maddening. And also genuinely useful because it means the feedback loop runs in both directions and you can push on it from the body side without waiting for the mental side to cooperate. The 20-second smile is the bluntest version of that. But the softer version is just becoming someone who occasionally notices what their body is doing and adjusts it. Sits up, lifts their gaze, opens their chest. Not as a performance, just as a small recalibration. It doesn't require willpower because it doesn't require you to first feel better. You change the physical input and the changed input eventually changes the state. No inspiration required. No particular readiness. Just sit up. Just lift your eyes. The state starts adjusting before you've decided anything. Panic is different from the other states in kind, not just degree. When it's running, the architecture of your thinking actually changes. Everything narrows. Everything accelerates. Things that weren't urgent 3 minutes ago feel like emergencies. Your breathing gets ahead of you. Shallow, fast, like you're mid-sprint while sitting still. The chest tightens. And underneath all of it is this groundless certainty that something is wrong, even when you know rationally there isn't, which creates its own specific hell. You know you're fine and you can't feel that you're fine, and the gap between knowing and feeling is exactly where the panic lives. Trying to think your way through it doesn't work. I know you've tried. Not because you're being irrational, you know it's irrational, you're telling yourself so in real time, you can hear yourself doing it, but because the rational processing the alarm has partially suspended is the same processing you're trying to use to counter it. The CO has less blood right now. You're trying to debug the system using the part of the system that's currently offline. I spent years doing this, trying to reason with a state that is not responsive to reason, telling myself in the most careful, thorough terms why there was nothing to panic about, and the panic continuing anyway, which then produced a meta layer of frustration on top of the panic, which made it worse. Count backwards from 100 in sevens. Out loud if you can. 100, 93, 86, 79, 72, 65. Keep going until the chest starts to release. Serial subtraction by sevens is just difficult enough to need genuine working memory. It's not automatic like counting by twos or fives, it needs real calculation. That calculation draws directly on prefrontal resources. Your brain cannot simultaneously run a full panic response and active arithmetic. Not enough bandwidth. The panic requires cognitive fuel to sustain itself. When you force the math, you siphon the fuel. The physiological intensity, the tight chest, the racing thoughts, the shallow breathing, reduces because the resources maintaining it are now on the arithmetic. You're not arguing with the panic, you're not trying to convince yourself you're okay, you're just doing math and the panic is losing its power source. 30 to 45 seconds and the acute spike drops. Not to calm. You're not going to feel great, but you're out of the worst of it, and from there breathing normalizes on its own, and normalized breathing changes the rest. You only have to start the chain. Don't stop too early. People do 3 rounds, decide it's not working, and quit. That's exactly when you need to keep going. Give it 60 seconds minimum. The resistance you feel at round 4 is the panic defending itself, not evidence that the technique isn't working. The counting is also completely invisible. You can do it in the middle of a meeting, sitting across from someone at a table, in a room full of people. Nobody can tell you're doing math in your head, you're just sitting there, looking more or less normal, and the physiological intensity is quietly dropping. That matters because a lot of the moments when you most need to regulate are moments when you also need to appear functional. There's usually also a shame layer with panic. You become aware of the panic, and that awareness feeds back into the alarm. I'm panicking, that's embarrassing, now I'm panicking about panicking. And a lot of people will just white-knuckle it rather than visibly do something about it. The counting removes that problem entirely. You're just sitting there. For lighter versions of this state, acute anxiety, social dread, that spiked feeling before something difficult, it works there too. Adjust how high you start based on how bad it is. Lighter, start from 50. Worst, start from 100. The motivation one I need you to actually hear because the conventional narrative about it is backwards, and the backwards version is the main thing keeping people stuck in cycles they don't have to be in. Standard story. Motivation is the precondition for action. You feel motivated, you do the thing. If you don't feel motivated, something is wrong with your commitment, your discipline, your relationship to the goal. Solution. Generate the feeling first, then act from the feeling. Find your why. Get inspired. Manufacture the internal state, then move. This is everywhere. It's the premise of half the self-help industry. It's wrong. Motivation follows action. The research is clear on this and has been for a while. The sense of engagement, of caring, of wanting to continue, these come from getting your hands into the material, from making actual progress, from doing the thing. The spark comes from the friction. Waiting to feel motivated before starting is like waiting for the room to warm up before you light the fire. You are the fire. Nothing is going to happen until you start. Why is starting so hard then? It's not a motivation problem. It's activation energy, a real neurological cost to initiating a task, especially one you've been avoiding. The brain defaults to the current state. Moving from not doing to doing costs more than moving from doing to continuing. The resistance is real. It's just not a character verdict. It's a gap between two energy states, and the gap is biggest at the very start. Tell yourself genuinely, not as a trick you're playing on yourself, that you're going to work on the thing for 2 minutes. Not let's see how it goes. 2 minutes defined, complete. After 2 minutes, full permission to stop. No judgment. 2 minutes. In practice, you almost never stop. Starting was the whole problem, and starting has happened. Your brain is in the material. The thing that felt impossible from the outside has a completely different texture from inside it. You moved first. The motivation followed. That's the actual sequence, and once you've experienced it enough times, it becomes genuinely hard to take the "I'll start when I feel ready" story seriously anymore. I had something on my list last year for almost 3 weeks. Not a hard thing, just a thing I kept not starting. And every day I didn't start it, the avoidance got heavier and the thing got more charged. Classic. I finally sat down one afternoon and said out loud to nobody, in an empty room, fully at peace with how strange that is, 2 minutes, started. 45 minutes later, the thing was done. The main feeling afterward was irritation about the 3 weeks, because the avoidance cost more mental energy than the task ever would have. The thing I'd been treating as a weight had been nothing. The weight was the not starting. When you're deep in avoidance, when something has been on your list long enough that it's become a charged object, you develop a quiet, private belief that you're the kind of person who doesn't get that thing done. The avoidance becomes evidence. The longer it sits, the more evidence accumulates, the more the belief solidifies. And from inside that story, starting feels even harder because starting would require updating the story. Sometimes we'd rather be right about ourselves than be wrong in a useful direction. 2 minutes sidesteps that entirely. It's not, I'm going to do the thing I couldn't do. It's, I'm going to do 2 minutes. The commitment is so small it doesn't engage the story. And then you do it. And then there's a counter data point. Keep using 2 minutes across enough different tasks and you start having a different story about yourself. Not because you decided to, not because you did affirmations, but because you accumulated actual evidence of being someone who starts things. The identity follows the behavior, not the other way around. When 2 minutes doesn't work, when you actually stop and still feel stuck, that's information, not failure. Some tasks are hard to start not because of activation energy, but because of genuine ambiguity about what the task even is, or because there's a real problem that needs solving before you can proceed. 2 minutes of real engagement will tell you which it is. You've moved from, I can't do this, to, I need to clarify this first, which is a different and solvable problem. I want to handle anger without being condescending about it, which the usual conversation is. The standard advice assumes the problem is the angry person doesn't know they should calm down. They know. Knowing isn't the issue. Calm down is an instruction your nervous system cannot execute from inside the physiological state that anger creates. It's like telling someone mid-fever to stop being hot.